I've had a Meyer lemon tree for about 5 years now, and it has become one of my favorite things in my garden. But there are definitely a few key things I wish I had learned a little bit sooner that would have made it a lot easier. So in this video, I'm going to share with you all the things that I wish I had known before I started growing Meyer lemons. First, I wish I had learned sooner that it's way easier to grow Meyer lemons in a pot. Now, I tried, and you know, if you live in zone 9 or warmer, go ahead and plant the tree in the ground. It's going to do well. Well, I live in zone 8B, right on the border of zone 9. So I thought, surely I can protect the tree over those occasional cold nights we get. And it did well at first. I planted it in my garden. I was able to protect it through some of the frostier nights until I wasn't. And we had some really freakishly cold nights, and I just couldn't quite protect it enough, and the tree died. Did I learn my lesson? No, not yet. I tried again. I did the same thing again, planted another Meyer lemon tree in my garden, and again was unable to keep it throughout the cold. So now, to be fair, those were some really unusually cold winters, but still, it was not worth the trouble. It was a huge pain. So please learn from me. It's a lot easier to plant a Meyer lemon tree like this one in a pot, because now I can control the environment. I can wheel it into my sunroom to protect it from frost, or when it starts getting even colder, I can put it in my garage for a few weeks. And it has done really well doing it this way. So please learn from me. Go ahead and plant your tree in a pot unless you are absolutely sure that it can handle your climate. Speaking of growing in a pot, it really matters what type of potting soil you choose, whether it's something that you've made yourself or something that you're buying from the store. What really matters is good drainage. So you want a potting mix that stays moist enough so that it doesn't dry out completely between waterings, because they do need consistent moisture. A little bit more about that in a minute. But you also need something that has enough large particles that the water can flow through, because it hates having soggy, kind of dense soil. And keeping that water around the roots is a really quick recipe for root rot. We don't want that. So make sure you have really good drainage. Make sure there are a couple of big holes drilled in the bottom of your pot so that water can flow through. And I'm going to link to a couple of good potting soil options for citrus trees in the description. I wish I had realized sooner that full sun really means full sun when it comes to growing Meyer lemons. Now, this is something I did right. I knew my tree needed sunlight, but it was only later that I came to realize what a huge difference it made in the quality and size of fruit. I mean, look at how ridiculous these lemons are. And I've already picked several off of this tree, but they're massive. They're almost the size of like a baseball, or even some of them are like a softball. They're so huge. I've cut a few open. They're amazingly juicy and luscious, and a lot of that comes down to sun exposure. So 6 to 8 hours of sunlight minimum, and I mean direct full sun. So that also translates, if you're going to grow them inside, you need to have a really sunny window to get the best quality fruit. That sunlight makes a huge difference, along with a couple other things that I'll be mentioning a little bit later in this video. Another thing I wish I knew is that watering means watering really thoroughly. This is something that I had to learn over time. So when you're growing any kind of citrus tree, but specifically Meyer lemon, especially if you're growing it in a pot, they need a good amount of water in order to grow the fruit. So once the tree blossoms and begins fruiting, you have to water really consistently. You want that soil to stay moist, not soggy, right? Because overwatering is definitely a thing, and that comes back to the soil drainage I mentioned a little bit ago. But you want to wait until the top couple inches of soil dry out. So I like to stick my finger in there, see when it's dry, but then water it until you see the water drain out of the bottom of the pot. And this is key because, and this is the other thing I wish I had known sooner, Meyer lemon trees need a lot of fertilizer, especially if they're grown in a pot like this one. So when you're fertilizing relatively frequently, salts and sort of deposits build up in the soil, and you need to flush them out with that water. Now, when it comes to fertilizing, I did not realize how much fertilizer that Meyer lemon trees need. These are hungry plants, more than any of my other citrus trees, especially if you're growing it in a pot, because there's limited soil. So the roots need to get the nutrients somehow, and that means you have to provide it. So I'm talking fertilizing between, I don't know, every 2 to 4 weeks, especially during the heat of the summer when you're watering really frequently. So don't be afraid to fertilize. Now, luckily, you can kind of look for clues in the plant to see if you're watering and fertilizing accurately. So that brings me to yet another thing I wish I had known sooner, and that is the leaves are talking to you. What the leaves of the tree look like tells you something about what the plant is going through. So if you look a little bit closer to my Meyer lemon tree, you'll see some leaves, especially some of the older leaves, that have some yellowing around the tips. That is a classic sign of some sort of nutrient deficiency, whether it's nitrogen or magnesium or phosphorus. It'll be in the leaves somehow. I do have an article on the Fruit Grove blog that talks about yellowing lemon tree leaves and what that means, so I will link to that in the description. But your leaves are talking to you. You also might see the lemon leaves curling. When they curl over, they do that sometimes when they're stressed out, when they're too dry, for example, if you're not watering enough. If the leaves just overall look pale, that could be a sign that you're watering too much. So watch for those leaves, watch for those little signals of what your plant is telling you. Speaking of the leaves, another thing to look for is any sort of pest damage. You can see on my tree, and I'll show you a little bit closer, some of the leaves have been chewed on by caterpillars or other pests. I also have some signs of some citrus leaf miners, which is a really common pest to encounter. Sometimes I'll notice that black sooty residue, which is a good sign that you have aphids. So there are a lot of things that your tree is going to tell you. Basically, neem oil is a great thing to have on hand to prevent these infestations from becoming worse. Be careful not to spray it if the tree is blossoming. We don't want anything to interfere with the pollinators. So be careful of that. But neem oil works really well. So does simply wiping down the surface of the leaves to help get rid of that sooty residue. And that can keep the tree healthier and happier and just make it stronger. Because one thing I've learned is that a healthy, happy tree will be able to take care of itself. It'll be able to fight off disease and pest problems and keep them under control. So keep your tree happy, and that'll help control the pests. I wish I had known sooner how much fruit thinning makes a huge difference with Meyer lemon trees. I mean, clearly my tree is happy. It's got massive, huge, a good number of lemons on this small tree. The problem with that is that I have a broken branch here. Do you see how all of the lemons are growing in this one area? And I've got these big clusters that actually are more spread out than they look. But they have just grown really big and heavy, and the tree was unable to support the weight of that fruit. So I've got a break right here. Now, luckily it didn't break all the way. So I've got kind of a patch job here where I put the branch back together. It was hanging on by just part of it, and I wrapped it up really tightly with some tree wrap and some Velcro tape, and it's holding together, and the lemons have finished ripening. That happened a month or two ago, and it's going strong. So hopefully that branch is healed, but it's not ideal. I wouldn't recommend doing it this way. I did thin the lemons off my tree, and Meyer lemons, along with other citrus, are going to drop a lot of fruit when they're really, really small. But then as the fruit matures, you want to look for clusters where there are more than just 1 or 2 lemons in one little spot, or if there's a single branch that has a huge number of fruit growing on it. It's painful, but go ahead and pick off some of the lemons, because otherwise what's going to happen is this. You're going to have a tree that gets stressed out and maybe breaks a branch, maybe overbears this year and may struggle to fruit next year. I think I'm going to be okay. I've had a really consistent crop with this tree, but it's something I wish I had realized a little bit sooner. Don't be afraid to thin the fruit. One more thing I wish I had known before I started growing Meyer lemons is just how delicious they are, because if I had known, I would have started growing them a lot sooner. And when you grow lemons at home, you get to pick them at the perfect ripeness. So your Meyer lemons are going to be incredibly juicy, They have really thin skin and they're surprisingly sweet. You really do get a good hint of that orangey flavor mixed in with that lemon tartness. And you can make some really yummy treats with them. I have a bunch of recipes on thefruitgrove.com for all sorts of things you can do with your homegrown lemons and lots of other homegrown fruits. So check that out if you haven't, and let me know in the comments if you have a favorite thing that you like to do with Meyer lemons. Thanks so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.